A single toilet, leaking silently with no sound and no visible drip, can waste over 200 gallons of water a day. That's not an exaggerated worst case. It's a documented, common failure that's happening in millions of homes right now, and almost nobody notices, because this particular leak doesn't make a single sound. There's a 2-minute test that reveals this exact leak in any toilet, using nothing but something you probably already have in your kitchen, and almost no homeowner has ever actually done it. We'll get to that test in a minute, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to run it yourself. If this is the kind of fix you're after, cheap, physics-based, no upsell, subscribe to the Independence Files. We cover one of these for a different part of the house, your RV, your boat, or your emergency setup every few days. Here's why 200 gallons a day is such a strange number to wrap your head around. That's roughly the same amount of water as 10 to 15 full bathtubs, disappearing every single day, from a fixture that never overflows, never drips audibly onto the floor, and never gives any visual sign anything is wrong. Multiply that across a full billing cycle, and a single silently leaking toilet can add well over $100 to a water bill in a single month, in some cases considerably more depending on local water rates. What makes this especially easy to miss is that most water bills arrive monthly or even quarterly, and usage is reported as one lump total rather than broken down by fixture. A jump in the bill gets blamed on a longer shower habit, more laundry, or simply the season, because there's no itemized breakdown pointing a finger at one specific toilet quietly running in the background the entire time. Most people assume they'd notice a leak this size. A dripping faucet announces itself with sound. A burst pipe announces itself with a flood. A toilet leak like this announces itself with absolutely nothing at all, because of exactly where the water goes. So here's the real question worth asking. How many invisible sources of waste exist in an average home simply because they don't make noise or leave a visible mess? Problems that would be obvious in an instant if they happen to be loud instead of silent? Think of it like a highway off-ramp that quietly diverts a share of traffic away from the main road, with no sign, no slowdown, and no backup anywhere visible. The cars simply disappear down a side route continuously, all day, without anyone on the main highway ever noticing traffic is lighter than it should be. That's essentially what's happening inside a leaking toilet tank. Water is constantly being diverted from the tank into the bowl and then down the drain, refilling and repeating in an endless quiet loop, without ever once overflowing or making a sound loud enough to notice. Mechanically, the culprit is almost always the same simple rubber or silicone flapper valve sitting at the bottom of the tank, the seal that's supposed to hold tank water in place until you press the flush handle. Once that seal ages, warps slightly, or collects small mineral deposits from hard water, it no longer creates a fully watertight seal against the flush valve opening. Even a gap smaller than a hair's width lets water continuously seep past it into the bowl, drop by drop, fast enough to matter over a full day, but slow enough that it never once triggers the overflow or the refill mechanism to run loudly. This isn't a new or obscure design flaw. It's simply the trade-off of the flush valve design nearly every toilet in the world has used for well over a century. The rubber or silicone flapper is, by design, a wear item. The entire mechanism depends on a soft material holding a watertight seal against a hard valve seat, cycle after cycle, for years at a time. Every material used for that seal eventually degrades, which means every single toilet using this design is on an unavoidable, if slow-moving, path toward exactly this kind of leak. Early flush valve toilets from the late 1800s used a simple rubber ball or plug for this exact same seal, and plumbing manuals from that era already documented the same failure mode being described here. A worn seal letting water pass silently into the bowl, refilling over and over. The material changed from rubber balls to today's flapper valves, but the problem of the seal eventually wearing out, which those early manuals described, has never actually been solved, just repackaged in a slightly different shape. Hard water makes this worse in a way most homeowners never connect to their toilet at all. Mineral deposits that build up on faucets and shower heads build up in exactly the same way on the flapper and the valve seat it presses against, creating a slightly uneven surface that a flexible rubber seal can no longer press flush against. A toilet in a hard water region can develop this exact leak years sooner than an identical toilet running on softer water, simply because of mineral buildup nobody thinks to associate with a running toilet. What's interesting is that the underlying flush mechanism hasn't fundamentally changed since it was standardized generations ago, specifically because it's simple, cheap, and reliable enough that redesigning it has never been worth the cost for manufacturers. The one component engineered to wear out over time is precisely the one nobody thinks to check until a water bill forces the question. Water utility and conservation agencies consistently cite silent toilet leaks as one of the single largest sources of avoidable household water waste, specifically because of how easily they go undetected compared to more obvious plumbing problems. That's not a guess from a single source. It's a pattern documented across water conservation programs in multiple regions, all pointing at the same mechanism. Plumbers and water conservation professionals who test toilets directly in customers' homes report the same finding repeatedly. A large share of normal-sounding toilets, with no visible drip and no complaint from the homeowner, turn out to be leaking measurably once actually tested, often surprising the homeowner, who had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. 3 separate threads, all confirming the same pattern. Plumbing manuals documenting this exact seal failure over a century ago, water agencies tracking aggregate residential waste today, and plumbers testing individual toilets directly in people's homes right now. That's a pattern spanning generations, not a single unverified claim. Keep that 2-minute test from the start of this video in mind. It's about to be the difference between wondering whether your own toilet has this exact problem and actually knowing for certain. It's worth being precise about what varies here, though. Not every leaking toilet wastes exactly 200 gallons a day. The actual rate depends on how large the gap in the seal has become, water pressure, and tank size. So it ranges anywhere from a relatively minor loss up to that much larger figure for a badly failed seal. What's consistent across the range is the complete lack of any audible or visible warning sign, regardless of how much water is actually being lost. So if this is such a common, well-documented issue, why doesn't every homeowner already know to check for it? It comes down to a simple mismatch between how this problem develops and how homeowners normally notice problems. Nearly every other household leak announces itself through sound, a visible puddle, or a sudden spike in an obviously connected bill, a running faucet, a burst hose, or a dripping ceiling. A toilet flapper leak produces none of those signals because the water never spills anywhere visible. It simply takes the exact path it's supposed to take, just slightly more often than it should. There's also a simple economic reason nobody proactively warns you about this. Neither the toilet manufacturer nor the water utility has any real incentive to help you catch it early. The manufacturer's involvement ends at the sale, long before a flapper wears out years later. The water utility, meanwhile, simply bills for whatever water gets used. A leak that inflates your bill doesn't cost them anything to fix, and it isn't their responsibility to flag it unless you happen to call and ask. Compare that to electricity, where a growing number of homes now have smart meters and apps showing real-time usage, making a sudden spike from something like a malfunctioning appliance far easier to notice quickly. Residential water metering hasn't caught up to that same level of visibility in most places. Most households still only see one lump total, weeks after the water was actually used, with no built-in way to trace it back to a single fixture quietly running in the background. As for what this actually involves, a standard replacement flapper valve, sized to match your specific toilet's flush valve opening, typically costs around $3 at any hardware store. It replaces the existing rubber or silicone flapper at the bottom of the tank, restoring a fully watertight seal against the same flush valve the original flapper was sealing against, using the exact same chain and lever mechanism the toilet already has. The test that reveals whether you actually need one is even simpler than the fix itself, and it's the same test water conservation programs have recommended for decades. Add a few drops of food coloring directly into the tank, not the bowl, and wait about 10 minutes without flushing. If color shows up in the bowl before you flushed, water is passing through that seal continuously, confirming exactly the kind of leak this video has been describing in a toilet that looked and sounded completely normal the entire time. Now, this isn't the only possible cause of toilet water waste, and it's worth being upfront about the limits here. A worn flapper is the most common culprit, but a small percentage of toilet leaks instead trace back to a faulty fill valve, a cracked overflow tube, or a hairline crack in the tank itself, problems a simple flapper swap won't fix. If the dye test confirms a leak but a new flapper doesn't resolve it, the fault likely sits somewhere else in the tank's mechanism. Cost savings from fixing this also vary considerably depending on local water rates. A household on a low municipal water rate will see a smaller dollar impact than one paying a premium rate or facing tiered pricing that penalizes high usage. Homes on private wells won't see a water utility bill impact at all, though they'll still see reduced strain and energy use from their well pump running more often than necessary to refill the tank. Older toilets, particularly those more than 15 or 20 years old, sometimes have flush valve seats that have become pitted or uneven from years of mineral buildup. In those cases, even a brand new flapper may not create a perfect seal, and a full flush valve rebuild kit, still a relatively inexpensive fix, becomes the more lasting solution. This isn't a substitute for checking other plumbing fixtures for similar silent waste, and it's not being presented as a one-time fix that guarantees zero future leaks. Flappers are wear items, and this same failure will eventually happen again over the years, simply because the material degrades on a predictable timeline. Which loops back to where this all started. The same invisible waste principle applies just as directly to an outdoor spigot or irrigation line leaking underground, quietly raising a water bill for months with no visible sign at the surface at all. It's the same kind of loss, just relocated outside where it's even harder to notice by accident. Most homes are leaking a small amount of something, somewhere, in a way that produces no sound and no mess, which means the only real way to find it is to actually go looking. The same way a few drops of food coloring can reveal a leak that's been running quietly for months. If you've run this test on your own toilet, or you're curious what else in your home might be leaking without ever making a sound, drop it in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'll do my best to help you figure it out.